What's it like behind the curtain of electoral politics? What happens when people run on abolitionist platforms, progressive platforms, platforms for the people, make certain promises, and then once they're in office, they do the opposite? Why can't we solve homelessness? Or why aren't we solving homelessness? Hello, everyone, and welcome to Conversations for the People with Matthew Solomon. I'm Matthew Solomon, and I'm so excited to have Gina Viola on the show today. Gina is in the film Reimagining Safety. Gina ran for mayor of Los Angeles in 2022 on an abolitionist platform and is not shy about speaking up about what happened and what's going on and what we can do. So please welcome to the show, Gina Viola. All right, Gina, welcome to Conversations for the People.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you. It's great to connect and reconnect. And when I started this podcast, you were definitely one of the first people I wanted to interview because, our conversation in the film was amazing, and we've personally had conversations since then. And with all the screenings across the country, people are always asking me more questions. So, uh, one thing that I really appreciate you that's really unique is you've had experience running for office and seeing behind the curtain. And so I'm excited to get into that with you today.
Okay, let's do it.
All right. So first of all, just like real quick, because you ran for mayor in 2022 in Los Angeles. You didn't, you weren't trying to be a politician. I know you didn't come from politics. So how did that all happen before we get into the other stuff?
So I was asked to run by folks in the racial justice movement, Black liberation movement here in Los Angeles. And primarily because, there was nobody representing our values that was running. For a minute, we thought that might be Karen Bass. But then her public safety platform came out and it was atrocious. More money to cops, more policing. Her program for the unhoused came out and that was more criminalization of poverty. So we brainstormed at the last minute. I always find this really interesting that she put her platform out with just enough time for somebody else to file to run, because literally it came out days before the end date to be able to file to run, which was a Saturday. So the Thursday before, we had a movement partner who was ready to run. I was going to help him. I was going to, take him down, file all the forms, go with him. And at the last minute, he said, I can't do it. I know Karen personally. She's a friend. I can't run against a friend.
Mm.
And I had the strangest reaction because initially I thought, friends run against friends all the time. And, when I think back on that, I'm like, of course they don't, not real friends. um, so they flipped the script. And the few of us that were organizing this said, hey, will you do it? And I had to think really carefully about it because, I had been asking people to run for like a year. And it felt wrong to then not say yes to something I had been asking folks to do. So that was the clarion call to actually go down and file to run for mayor. When I think about what in my soul had me say yes, other than just obligation, for something I had been asking others to do, it was this desperation that the LAPD will never stop killing Black folks in this city.
Mm.
The LA sheriffs will never stop killing Black and brown folks in this city. And I felt like this is a desperate attempt to try and at least have that conversation. If nothing else, have that conversation. And then also, to have the conversation about the criminalization of poverty in Los Angeles. Those things were not going to be mentioned on that stage if I were not on it.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember there was one of the debates Was it at Loyola Marymount with Kevin De Leon when he was talking about the tiny houses and you pushed back because somebody had actually died? Was it that day or the day before?
It was the KCRW debate, and it was specific to it was in and around the unhoused in Los
Yeah.
Angeles. They tailored the debate for that. Rick Caruso didn't show up. I never got to debate Rick Caruso, not once, even though I asked him many times. Um, it was in Little Tokyo that someone had just died a few days before that debate. And yes, he was talking about the tiny sheds. I kept
Mhm.
correcting
Right.
him,
Right.
saying
Right.
they're
Right.
sheds. They're not. It's tool shed. It's
Yeah.
it's not a home. Um, yeah, I the one thing I didn't bring up at that debate. This is this. I have like two regrets running for mayor, or two things that two. I don't want to say concessions I made, but it's interesting. I did not bring up that person that had died in Little Tokyo at that debate, and I
Mm.
absolutely should have. And Erica asked me very point blank afterwards, like, why? Why didn't you bring it up? And I said, I felt like it was rude. Like, so she said, that's the first step to political betrayal,
Mm.
what you just did. Because that's the one thing as we're trying to support candidates, right? Like her expression is run to win, lead to lose.
Mm.
And because it's a slippery slope to political betrayal. And she was absolutely right because I censored myself at
Yeah.
that moment. And yeah, and that's a shame for the 6 people a day that die on our streets in Los Angeles every day
Yeah.
that I didn't take that opportunity.
Yeah. When we were doing the interview, I obviously there's things that end up on the cutting room floor and there's like great things that you want to that I want to include, that people want to include, and then you can't. And there was I think it was part of the recorded conversation where we were talking about homelessness here in Los Angeles, and you said that it's a policy choice that still exists. And so I would love for you to expand on that because I know we didn't expand on that at the time. Um, and it's something that has stuck with me the last couple years.
Yeah, it's an absolute policy choice. What we're doing with the crisis of our time, of our lifetime, the unhoused crisis, is we're managing it and we're spending untold billions of dollars to manage it. We're not doing anything to solve it. It has become its own industry unto itself, and people are getting wealthy off of this. Example, we started out talking about Measure A, which is coming, which will replace Measure H, right? 10 years ago, we taxed ourselves, I think it's half a penny, um, to the tune of $500 million a year to build housing in Los Angeles.
Mhm.
10 years later, it's getting ready to expire. It's a $500 million that has been going towards all sorts of things, a lot of law enforcement, I will say,
Yeah.
not as much housing as they would have liked to have had built. So now what they want to do is they want to replace it with Measure A, which doubles the tax. So it'll be about a little over $1 billion a year, and it'll be in perpetuity. There's no end date to
Mm.
it, but it is a tax, right? Um, and I tell folks, if you're going to vote for it, then vote for it and show up to these listening sessions. Like I just went to one recently for Measure H. They will have them for Measure A. And I'm told there'll be even more transparency and more ways for us to tap into where the money's going. I'll believe it when I see it. But for Measure H, they have these listening sessions per your district. And when I got on, I noticed a myriad of service providers. Pardon me. Sorry, I should have gotten a glass of water.
Mm.
A myriad of service providers on the call, and then some government officials, but like more than 100 people. And then there was me in the corner,
Mm.
just regular old me. And as they would tell stories about what was happening in Hollywood with the unhoused, eventually I would raise my hand
Mm.
and I would give the reality of the story they had just told. So there was a gentleman on the call from Hollywood Forward. And that is a coalition of folks who since 2008 have been committed to ending homelessness in Hollywood. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So he DMs me and he's like, I'm surprised we don't know each other. And I'm like, I'm not. But we met the next day. He invited me to join his coalition. Apparently, it's a membership fee. And what it grants you is the access to their monthly meetings. So I said, well, go ahead and have me at a meeting. I'll attend a meeting and be a fly on the wall. But I'm not interested in being a member until I can see what's going on with the organization.
Yeah.
So I went and I attended the meeting. And again, it was untold amount of service providers, a whole bunch of service providers. His website, go to the website. It's it lists law enforcement, the city attorney. I think losses like maybe the third or fourth thing it lists. Untold dollars managing this situation, not solving it, right? Everybody has a piece of the pie now. If you look at California as a state, the reason Newsom is out there like throwing away people's belongings and acting like he's going to take the situation into his own hand is because in his state budget last year, $26 billion was spent on homelessness. And by many, many estimates, it would cost $20 billion to solve it for the country.
Mm-hmm.
For the country.
Yeah.
So Los Angeles is a big piece of that because we have the most unhoused folks living on the streets in our city, in our county, in our state. So it is absolutely diabolical what is happening with this situation. And the fact that we continue, when you look at the numbers that Kenneth Mejia puts out, he's somebody who's gone into city government and has really delivered what he said he would do, bringing transparency to the city budget. And if you look at, the largest line items, it's policing, and then it's sanitation. So yet again, we're dealing with our biggest issue. I think we can agree our biggest issue is poverty, right? We're folks living on the streets. We're dealing with it with police and with sanitation. So housed folks like you and I, when we see that that's the city, county, state's response to this crisis, decade after decade, it becomes ingrained in our way of thinking that these folks forced to live on the streets are criminal trash. So when it comes time to deal with that situation, we just want it to disappear. We don't care where it goes. We don't care how it happens. It's the only way people could get behind these sweeps. These sweeps are deadly. These sweeps are useless. These sweeps are corrupt. There's so much corruption baked into the way we're dealing with all of this. So I want to see leaders that are going to get in there and shout that from the rooftops, right? I understand that it's going to be hard to change things because systems have been built and everyone will take you to court and, the realities of that. But at the end of the day, if you're not getting in there like Kenneth and screaming as loud as you can about what's actually happening, then I don't know.
So I have a couple questions and because you've gone door to door, you still do go door to door and canvas for people and I know in the film you mentioned that when you were canvassing as mayor, people could agree that police and prisons weren't the answer, but it was really hard to get folks to see beyond that. I'm always in my research, I'm like, how do we reach people? How do we affect people? For many years, maybe naively, I thought that just accessing everyone's empathy, that people were empathetic, but it's been very disappointing, especially the last 4 to 6 to 10 years, to realize that not everybody has access to that. Maybe they do, but it's buried or it's redirected or whatever. But what do you think, or what are some ways that you think that we could reach people?
What I tell folks now, because folks will say to me, just give me something tangible I can do. What can I do? And honestly, what I tell them now is make a connection with your nearest unhoused person that you see regularly. And I don't just mean throw a bag of goodies at them now and again or a coat or something. I mean, make eye contact, say hello, and do that over and over again until you get a connected response back, because it's going to take some time. Because we are a much greater danger to the folks living on the streets than they ever will be to us.
Yeah.
And so their guard is up. Now I know that's a tall order. I say that, and not a lot of people are not going to follow through with that. So the second thing I do is say, mutual aid. Mutual aid is really, I think, where our solutions lie. And because we have finally recognized that the state is not going to take care of us. The state is not going to, CalCare is a perfect example. The state doesn't even want us to have health care, let alone, decide that housing is a human right. You referenced the KCRW debate. The most interesting thing I think came out of that debate was that one of the questions they asked was, do you believe housing is a human right? And both Karen Bass, who is now our mayor, and Kevin De Leon, who is still a city council person, shame on him, both said, yes, housing is a human right. And for me, I thought, wow, this is great. We have the soundbite. We need to hold them to this, because there's a whole lot that comes behind that when you decide it's a right. So yeah, mutual aid groups, and it depends on who I'm talking to, right? If I'm talking to somebody who I know will roll their sleeves up and make that kind of street level effort, then I will point them to their nearest mutual aid group to support. If it's somebody who is much newer to it and needs a more liberal handheld approach, I will send them to SELA. I send SELA, that's the organization that Nithya Raman, I think she founded it or was a co-founder of it, supports the unhoused kind of in the east side of Los Angeles. Maybe a Girl is now, I think, their executive director. But they're a great starter org to get folks engaged, because where I've seen folks change on this is when they've made that connection with people who live on the streets. Once I have folks come out with me 2 or 3 times and see the way like I'm interacting with folks, and then get a chance to interact with folks themselves, they walk away going, those are just regular people.
Yeah.
And it's wild that we are here and that we have to say that and remind people, but telling them, giving them data is never going to do it.
Yeah.
And even sharing stories about racism it has been very impactful at the doors. Sharing stories about my unhoused neighbors and friends is not as impactful because of, well, I don't know why. I don't know why that is, because I think anti-Blackness is the strongest force running. Like, I just deeply, after October 7th, I even said that to folks in BLM. I think anti-Blackness is the deepest, darkest, strongest force out there, and it drives so much. And so it's interesting that I'm saying to myself, okay, the stories work around racism, but not necessarily for our unhoused neighbors. It's probably one and the same.
Yeah, it is. And I'm glad you brought that up, because that's something. When October 7th happened last year, one of the things that was one of the many things, but one of the things that was so horrific was seeing the pushback against, like, Black Lives Matter LA, when they spoke out in support of Palestinians, and to see Jewish white women literally saying, we marched with you in 2020 and now you're doing this, so we're never donating or participating with you again. And on the one hand, it was like, did you not learn anything? And on the other hand, it was like, that was so swift and decisive without a conversation. And then the other part is the anti-Blackness that is always in there, no matter how much work we do. Like, it's just baked in. And it at this point, it shouldn't be shocking I guess it's not shocking, but it's like, wow, here we go again. And yet, my Black friends who have shared with me their stories, like a couple of my friends in particular that I've had since junior high, over and over again are like, no, that's what they think of us, And so me coming to grasp that reality has been really eye-opening, and it makes the work seem daunting, but also, like you were saying, it's also that thing that's like, okay, well, I got to get up and do this because nobody else is gonna, and it's still happening.
Yeah, I mean, that's, so complicated. Folks, will quickly pivot to making it a class issue
Yeah.
so that they don't have to talk about it being a race issue. And that's been an interesting piece to dissect, in terms of intersectionality. And I credit Nikki with some of that. Like, I took her course shortly after you wonderfully introduced us.
Yeah, Nikki Black. Yep.
Yeah, Nikki Black.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, how white is your feminism? It was actually a little bit different. It was a Spark project, which I never sparked. I never got to my Spark project, so I have to take the course again. But there was so much talk about, how white is our feminism, intersectionality, all of these things that really, if you're not interrogating that in your own self all the time,
Yeah.
then, it's showing up everywhere, and you're making, it's easy to make excuses for things. You're not doing anymore. It was definitely very troubling to see the immediate and swift drop off of folks after October 7th from the anti-racist work. And I think Black folks and Black Lives Matter in particular, I'm talking about Black Lives Matter grassroots, because that is Black Lives Matter. Yep. And Black Lives Matter Los Angeles had never been quiet about their support for Palestinian freedom. Like, they have always been very vocal proponents of that. So much so, I don't recall who got booted off of a women's march, LA, but it was somebody from BLM-LA, might have been Tandy Way, was removed from the speaker list because of her previous statements in support of Palestinians, Palestinian freedom. And I know for myself, like, I had really recognized that I also had bought into this narrative that as a white person, as a non-Jewish person, as a non-Arab person, as a non-Muslim person, like, wasn't really for me to decide, or it wasn't really for me to even know much about. I mean, let's face it, our schooling on it was abysmal.
Oh, yeah.
Non-existent. Yeah. So when it came time, especially when I was running, right? When I was running, this idea of Zionism popped up. And I had heard it. And thankfully in 2019, there was some stuff that had happened in Palestine. I had been asked to support some actions in and around Palestinian liberation, where that's when, honestly, 2019 was like my first introduction to Zionism and what it was. And so even while I was running, one night I was in bed with my husband, and I said, you have to break this down for me. Like, I'm having a hard time understanding the difference, and like what's Israel, what's Zionism, what's Judaism, like what's, so we just kind of really hashed it out. And, and luckily I have a lot of Jewish friends. My stepmother is Jewish, and so was raised in and around a lot of Jewish holidays. So I had a lot of folks that were willing to dive deep with me about some of this stuff. Because when I was running, I was really disturbed at how bad, I felt like I was running against two billionaires, right? Rick Caruso, total billionaire, and then Karen Bass, billionaire backed. Yeah. And backed by Jeffrey Katzenberg, who folks kept telling me is a Zionist. And then I had friends, Jewish friends, who said, you absolutely cannot say that out loud. You cannot say that Karen Bass is being backed by a Zionist. So that brings me to my second regret about the mayor's race, because one of the things I'm proudest of is I never backed down from our messaging, so much so that I'm in the LA Times saying a vote for Rick Caruso is a vote for white supremacy. I lost a lot of friends over that. Not a lot of friends. I lost a few acquaintances over that, because they were going to vote for Rick Caruso. And they point blank said, you're calling me a racist. And I was like, it was sort of how I felt about the Trump vote back in 2016. For
Hmm.
me in 2016, if you were voting for Donald Trump, you were racist.
Yeah.
Like, that was the only, I don't believe that as much anymore, Matthew, believe it or not.
Hmm. Okay.
I now think I mean, the lion's share of them are racists,
Yeah.
and maybe all 100% of them are, but I think there was more to it than just voting for him as an anti-black racist vote and make America white again. I think there was this incredibly naive assumption that this man was an outsider and
Right.
not a politician. And people are so over politicians. They're so over the politician stance. And
Yeah.
what they don't realize is Donald Trump has been the government for many, many decades. Like, he's had a seat at presidential tables long before you or I ever will, you know?
Yeah.
So that's, so now, but, so going back to this, October 7th. So I'm already having this awakening, like during running for mayor, about like, okay, how divisive this Zionism term is,
Mhm.
especially in Los Angeles, and that folks were telling me, don't you dare say that out loud.
Yeah.
And again, because I was just kind of newly educating myself about this, I didn't have the confidence like I did with the defund the police. Like, that messaging, I went everywhere with. I was
Hmm.
not afraid. I go into the police commission and say it. Like, I had no qualms. But this piece, I was like, ooh, if I say this and then I get questioned, like, I don't know.
Hmm.
I was not as confident about what I knew about it, other than I knew for everything I was reading, Zionism looked like straight up the worst of white supremacy, like racism to me.
Yeah.
Um, So I was very concerned to see a Black woman being backed by what I'm learning is a deeply Zionist person, who has a lot of power and influence. I mean, this is the same man who, when we were in the midst of lockdown and nobody could get into City Hall, Jeffrey Katzenberg met with each and every city council person in person to bring back sweeps because the sweeps had stopped. Folks on the ground had gotten the city to stop sweeping because we didn't know what we didn't know with COVID, right? We
Yeah.
just knew that you couldn't do this, right?
Hmm.
You can't do it anyway. But um, this man had 4118, which had been dormant. The city had not been using 4118 to ticket, cite, and harass and jail humans. And he brought it back. And one by one, you saw city council people with a whole new list of 4118 addresses every city council meeting. That was Jeffrey Katzenberg. Jeffrey
Wow.
Katzenberg himself. I mean, we would go to city council even after they'd finally opened the doors and try to get into some of those offices, and impossible.
Hmm.
I mean, I mean, really, Jeffrey Katzenberg, the sheriff, and the chief of police run Los Angeles.
Have you ever wondered what public safety could look like if we reimagined it from the ground up? Watch Reimagining Safety, a powerful documentary that explores solutions rooted in dignity, care, and justice. Visit reimaginingsafetymovie.com and join the movement to build a safer, more equitable future for everyone.
So one of the things that I wanted to ask you about, and this is something, so doing these screenings of reimagining safety across the country, people always ask, what can we do? And so there's the local organizers who are doing the work, and then there's the government component. And we've had some awesome city council members who are hardcore for the people, especially in Denver, and Sacramento, who have been on the panels. Uh, but then there are the folks like we know here in LA who have run for office on abolitionist platforms, on progressive platforms, and then once they're in, the decisions and the bills are not that. And it's been really frustrating and upsetting. Um, and not just here. I mean, there's certain senators in different states,
Congress people.
yeah, Congress people and all of that. So what's the deal with that? Because I know, because on the one hand, people are like, well, you got to vet people, but I know these people, to the best of our abilities, have been vetted based on their endorsements. But what's happening as far as what you've seen?
In Los Angeles, the system corrupts. The system corrupts you the minute you arrive. I'll go back to Nithya Raman when she got elected, which was historic. She unseated David Ryu, the first Korean on council. So it wasn't even a white person she unseated. She had the most amount of volunteers that have ever volunteered on a city council campaign in Los Angeles. I think it was 2,000, over 2,000 volunteers inside and outside the district. So much excitement for, what we thought was going to be one of the most progressive voices, in that room. And the only other progressive, if you want to call him that, would have been Mike Bonin, who was on council at the time. And from the outside looking in, Mike did not support her at all. She came in, her staff would call folks at White People for Black Lives or Black Lives Matter Los Angeles to say, okay, these things are coming up. What's important to BLM? And we would finally say, look, no cop money. Like anything that's giving more money to the LAPD, we want you to be a no on. Like that's our interests. That's where our interests are. You don't need to keep calling us and asking us that question. And it wasn't long before that change. I want to say she maybe gave one no cop money vote, where she maybe called something special to talk about her concerns for it. Almost immediately, she was voting with the rest of the council. And if you look historically at LA City Council, they vote unanimously 98% of the time.
Wow.
That in itself, I told this to my, what is Mary? I guess she's my sister-in-law or cousin-in-law, Scott's stepmother's daughter, who works for Sherrod Brown in DC.
Oh, yeah.
When I told her this, that our city council votes, unanimously 98% of the time, she said, say no more. That's corruption. Like that's just by definition, that is corruption. And, some of the pushback Nithya would give us early on in those votes was like, I don't want to be the performative vote. And I'm like, but you are being performative by voting with them. We want you to vote your values. We want you to vote your constituents' values. So there's a real, and even with the budget, like we really pushed her hard to be a no vote, like Eunesis is now, right? On that budget, we were inviting her, really asking her to be the first, no vote on this budget. And what several members of her staff told us was, if she had done that, she wouldn't get the line items in next year's budget that she had in this year's budget. Again, corruption. This is corruption. So it doesn't matter how good your values are. Doesn't matter how much of an abolitionist you are. If you get there and you're like, okay, I got to get this stuff from my district. Like my district has not had potholes filled for 5 years, right? Like I got to at least make that happen. And so I got to vote to play. And I will say Eunesis votes against things more often than anyone I've ever seen.
Yeah.
But again, the system has already shifted what she's been able to do. I mean, Hillside Via is a perfect example. Before she was even in office, Gil Cedillo, her predecessor, put forth a motion to eminent domain Hillside Via, who had a building that had been owned by a slumlord, Tom Botts, for years. And he, tripled people's rents overnight and did all kinds of awful things. There's been no follow through on that. And of course, people can throw all kinds of legalese at us and, realities, whatever, what have you. You need to be saying out loud why you can't do it if you can't do it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I know we're getting short on time, but like, Hugo Soto Martinez, I know, like, who ran on a defund the police.
He did not. Hugo talked out of both sides of his mouth while he was running. Okay. He said defund the police down at Leimert Park in Africatown, right? But then on another forum with other candidates, he said, no, I'm not in favor of defund the police. I sat next to him in a forum I was pushing a $39 minimum wage, right? Which ended up, Matthew, that was the most controversial thing about my campaign. It wasn't defund the police. It was the minimum wage I was calling for.
Wow.
And so when they asked us each one by one, what do you think is the minimum wage? I said $39. Ugo whispered to me under his breath, he's like, that's what union people make. And I was like, yeah, exactly, right? Then the mic got to him and he said $20 an hour. Gina's crazy. We'll never get 39.
Wow.
I mean, believe me, I was Albert Corrado all the way. We need an impacted family member by police violence on that city council if we are ever to make any headway with this. And Al's a friend, and Al's amazing, and what you see is what you get. So, I was never team Ugo.
Yeah.
But I knew from that moment that Ugo was not even remotely one of us.
Wow. Yeah, because I had first heard him do like a whole segment on NPR talking about like the same thing that was in the film. I was like, oh, he's saying the same stuff that's in the film. And so here we are.
Yeah.
So then I want to get into with the time we have left, the work you're doing with Healthcare for Us, and then what are the alternatives? Because we were talking before we started recording that electoral politics is limited, to say the least. But what can we be doing to take care of us?
We need to start building systems of care outside the state, truthfully. Connect with your local mutual aid organizations. Get to know your neighbors. I even heard this I think it's in the film, this chief of police say, that the way to be safe is to know your neighbors. And it's true. Call your neighbors when things happen in your neighborhood. It's connecting to mutual aid groups, building. Yes, we need to tear down these harmful systems, but we're not just going to tear them down and walk away. We need to start thinking about what replaces them. So what I'm interested in doing is building what comes next, whether the state helps us or not. That's not novel. That's what the Black Panthers were doing. That's what lots of folks who came before me have been doing, and ostracized, criminalized, jailed for it. Frankly, It's very frightening. In the world of medicine, I read the most incredible book recently. It's Social Medicine and the Coming Transformation. Highly recommend it. Basically talks about in the global South, all the movements to get corporations out of healthcare and public health are why the United States goes in and coups these governments is for that. Like, this is how interested they are. And when I say they, I mean the 8 oligarchs that run the show are in keeping us ill. There's no investment for them to keep us well. And I worry with this, they do need workers. They've always needed workers. So, at least they need us alive. With the advancement of AI, eventually they won't even need us alive anymore. And the folks I'm on the ground with in mutual aid organizations, like, we're not even interested in trying to barter in those spaces anymore. We're just like, let's build communities. I've now been to resource fairs in the last couple of months that had food, clothing, doctors, and everything free. Everything is free. Folks just show up, bring what they got. It's really important, and I think it's going to be vital if we're to survive. And always there's an art component and entertainment component because we have to remain joyful. Right? Melina Abdullah taught me it's a beautiful struggle, and Black folks have shown me the way on that. Like, I could have just deteriorated into dust with my anger and despair over what is. I always have to remember that we have to maintain our joy too.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that. And there's some, when I was in Dallas for the screening, there are a bunch of interconnected organizations that are doing what you were talking about. They're growing food, they're repurposing soil, they have the medical, they have the violence prevention, they have all of that. And it's been really inspiring.
Beautiful. Yep. Those are popping up everywhere. And I think like the most, I think Oregon now has like a really a very serious land trust, very serious, like outside the government. Like, it must not even be a land trust. I'm not sure how they're doing it, but I know that there is a community there that is pretty much off the grid.
Yeah.
and taking care of one another. And we're just going to start to see that. I'd like to see Los Angeles. I want to see us be that sanctuary city, right? I want to see us be the place where you can come and get taken care of and get your needs met and know that, we're going to welcome you here. So I want to see us win Los Angeles.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. Well, Gina, where can people find you and follow you?
So I am healthcareforus.org. It's HC4US.org. I am co-chair of that organization. And that's a great way to tap in. We're connecting everything to healthcare at this point. So you can find me there. On the socials, I'm still Gina, Forla. Actually, that's Instagram and maybe Facebook. I don't know. And Twitter is actually Gina Viola Peak. So
awesome.
All over the place.
All right, cool. We'll put all that in the show notes. Gina, thank you so much for being here. It's always great to
Thank you, Matthew. I love that you're having these conversations. They're great.
All right. Big thank you to Gina Viola for being on the show today. Thank you to all of you for listening and watching and tuning in. Please like, share, and subscribe to keep this going. And make sure you go watch Reimagining Safety. Visit reimaginingsafetymovie.com for updates. And as always, thank you for joining Conversations for the People. Until next time, all power to the people.